like it if people would fill out and with your name and address and so on, and you want to be on our mailing list so you know about other educational opportunities we have. So if you would like to, you could fill that out and give me that at the end. Also, those religious ed credit papers are in the back. Okay. Well, last week we had Jimmy Stewart doing Simon Peter. I don't know what we're going to have this week. So we'll wait and find out. But the question at hand this week is to see what we know about Jesus of Nazareth, the historical person. Now, that problem is created by the fact that what we have in the Gospels, we now know, are productions of a community of people, and the authors of those Gospels, in all likelihood, are not eyewitnesses to the event. The Gospels are written much later, we think, around the year 70, the Gospel of Mark and Matthew and Luke in the 80s, and John's Gospel in the 90s. Jesus died somewhere around the year 30, probably. So what we've got is a long period of time from Jesus' public life and death until they write it down in the Gospels, as much as 60 years. Well, when you look at those Gospels written so much later, and you realize that the Gospel authors had a particular intention in mind, that they were committed to faith in Jesus Christ, that they were trying to present a picture of him that would be appealing to others, that they were trying to convert others to the faith, then you get a sense of the problem. Because the problem becomes, is what's written in those four Gospels that we've got really reflective of what Jesus of Nazareth was really like, what he said and did? That's what set the problem in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century for a lot of biblical scholarship. Well, at one time, the answer to that question came back very negative. People, when they began to look at that problem, would say, well, geez, you can't know very much about Jesus at all, because these people were slanting their material, because we can see that they sort of have a bias in what they have to say. Some of that material, it appears they sort of made up or produced themselves. And therefore, we can know very little about Jesus of Nazareth. In fact, one of the famous statements of a scholar about this is about all we can know about Jesus is that there was this traveling rabbi who once said, Abba, Father. And beyond that, we could hardly know anything about Jesus. This problem was talked about in terms of how does the Christ of faith, the one we meet in the Gospels, relate to the historical Jesus, the Jesus of history. Now, after a lot of skepticism, in other words, about that, especially in the 20th century, connected with the great scholar Rudolf Bultmann, then we have found now a new kind of movement that's probably best represented by the book by Edward Skilovex called Jesus, and the second volume called Christ, where he has shown, and the scholars in general would agree today, that we can say a lot more about Jesus of Nazareth than people thought in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So that they have thought of new ways of uncovering the link between the Christ of faith and the Jesus of history. When they do that, they really find a lot of different kinds of materials. They find some things that we think Jesus definitely did and said, other things that sort of reflect what the kind of person he was, and thirdly, material that appears to be sort of made up, fabricated by the gospel authors. So that's the general problem that lies behind the class tonight. So my whole bit tonight is to see what it is that we really can know about Jesus of Nazareth. And I think there really is a lot of material. And want to try to approach it this way. Tonight it will be, what is this? This will be Jimmy Stewart doing something else, doing a lot of things. But the first thing that I want him to do is to tell you how I think a lecture by a Jewish Pharisee in the early second century A.D., at the time of Jesus, might sound. And his topic for his lecture, I have to get into this character. I don't know why I ever started this whole approach. But back by popular demand, we have this Pharisee in the year 125 giving his lecture. And the title of my lecture tonight is Jesus of Nazareth really the Messiah or not? And my clear thesis is that he really can't be the Messiah. There's no way that Jesus of Nazareth can be the Messiah at all. And I got a lot of reasons for that. The first reason is that Jesus was from Galilee. Now anybody who knows anything about the coming of the Messiah knows that the Messiah would be from Judea, from Jerusalem, or perhaps from Bethlehem, the city of David. Jesus of Nazareth, as his very title tells, he isn't from Judea. He's from the northern area, from Galilee, from Nazareth. You know, when I ask you what good could ever come out of Nazareth, well, what Galilee? I mean, they got money up there. That's right. They were fairly wealthy, and the fishing was good up there, a lot better than in our area. But they really didn't amount to much up there. Those people were hardly believers. About the only good thing I can imagine they ever did was produce revolutionaries. They always had these people who wanted to overthrow the Roman emperor and so on. Galilee. Oh, it's just not conceivable that the Messiah could come from that kind of place, especially Nazareth. You know that Nazareth is not mentioned once in the whole of the Hebrew Scriptures. Not once. I mean, of what significance is that city, and how could we think of the great Messiah ever coming from there? Oh yeah, you know, they got that story about Jesus getting born down in Bethlehem. But that story, I mean, that doesn't hold any water. It obviously doesn't hold up. Have you ever heard anybody in our area have any remembrance of that? Have you ever heard anybody say, any family ever knew they were down there in Bethlehem? Ever remember Jesus as a boy in Jerusalem? Have you ever heard anybody who knows that story? It's obvious. A made-up story by those fellows they call the gospel writers. No way that Jesus has any real connection with this area down here in Judea. You know, rumor even has it that he was illegitimate. Now, I'm not saying what to make of that, you know, but there's certainly a lot of rumors around about that. And I think that a lot of their people feel defensive about that. In fact, I sort of think maybe that's why they got those stories again in those Gospels about a virgin birth and all that. Well, the rumor has it that this Jesus really was illegitimate. I don't want to make too much about all of that, but it just doesn't sound good to me. Well, the Galileans, I mean, those people don't even talk right. You notice they got this accent. That's how they tripped up one of his followers, Peter. Some of our the young girl in the courtyard, when they were finally getting around to trying, she caught him right away with that crazy accent those people have. Can you imagine a Messiah walking around talking with that kind of accent? It just doesn't figure at all. So I don't think it makes much sense to think of him as the Messiah. This Galilean impostor is what I would end up calling him. Well, I think if you even look at their own materials, they got a story there in the Gospel, especially in Mark's Gospel, but it's in Matthew and Luke also, where Jesus goes out and he preaches for a while, and then he comes back to his own town, and he goes into the synagogue and starts to preach there. Well, when he gets in there, the people, they don't even accept him. People say, well, who's he? Isn't that the son of Joseph and Mary? We even know his brothers and sisters. Who does he think he is? Yeah. Then they said, right there it says in the Gospels, well, he's nothing but the carpenter. The carpenter, we know him, we know his family. How can he be the Messiah? I tell you, the people in his own town got so upset, it says right in that Gospel that Luke wrote, they took him out to the brow of the hill there by Nazareth and wanted to throw him right over. Wanted to kill him. Didn't make any sense for him to be talking like that of being the Messiah. And so how could I ask you again, how could a guy that ordinary, that his own people in his own town don't recognize him or know him, that he's so just a carpenter, how could he ever be thought of as the Messiah? And then, it's another thing. I don't even think his own family understood him. You'd think if there was a guy who was the Messiah, at least his mother and his family would understand him. But they got that story again in Mark's Gospel where he goes off and he's preaching and they go out to get him. They think he's loony. They think he's crazy. His own family, they're going to go get him and bring him back home. Looks like even his mother was involved in that. Didn't understand him. So again, I ask you, how can we think of this fellow being the Messiah when his own family sort of rejected him? And finally, some of the stuff he said is crazy and proven to be wrong. One of the things he kept going around saying was that the end of the world was coming soon. Well, he kept talking like that. Hurry up, we don't have much time. End is coming soon. This generation won't pass away until all these things happen. So I ask you again, how can we have the Messiah here? A guy who's wrong about that. Here it is, the year 125. All of his generation is dead and gone. He said he'd return. The end times would come before they all were dead. It hasn't happened. So, seems clear that this Jesus of Nazareth cannot really be the Messiah. The evidence is too strong. Messiah can't be from Galilee, can't be from Nazareth. It's supposed to be from Judea, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. And he was too ordinary. Too ordinary through all of his life. His people didn't accept him. His own townspeople didn't understand him. His own family rejected him. Finally, he's wrong about very important things. I could add for you still another one, but that is that when we believe that when the Messiah comes, the new age will be here. People will live in peace and justice and harmony. Just look at the world and tell me that the Messiah has really come. Well, I use that particular literary form to bring out, I think, at least some of the things about Jesus of Nazareth. His things that historically that we then know to be true precisely because the people who were against him and so on would affirm them. And so the first thing that we do know about Jesus of Nazareth is roughly when he lived, in the first century of our era, dating coming from his birth. We do know that his mother and father were Mary and Joseph. We do know that he was from Galilee. and spent a good time of his preaching in the northern part of that area. We know that he was a Jew, that he lived his life as a Jew. He followed out Jewish customs, had a Jewish mother and father, that he was steeped in the Jewish scriptures, that all the way to the end of his life he lived as a Jew. In fact, as we read in the Synoptics, at the very last day of his life, he was still celebrating their major religious festival, that is the Passover feast. We do know that during his lifetime, the kind of charge that was made here by this preacher in year 125 was indeed leveled against him. Part of the speech that he gave is from the very scriptures, isn't it? Can any good come out of Nazareth? Also, there was a general sense of putting down Galilee at that time, that it was a place of maybe commerce and trade and so on, but really not a place where anybody intellectual or academic or religious or things like that could possibly be from. Okay, maybe a start here with what we can know about Jesus. A lot more than just saying an itinerant rabbi. Let me try another one here. See what we can do with this. Maybe there's questions that arise from that. You know, maybe let's take a minute just to see if there's any questions anyone wants to ask me about that much, or the lecture that we heard from the Pharisee in 125. There's some things I said in there that I didn't clarify. That's what makes me think of that. If no one doesn't bother anyone else, then I won't let it bother me either, yes? Yeah. Oh, I think that only in terms of, well, they're not really with it. It's like if we had a professor lecturing maybe with that used that had a certain speech pattern that didn't show any refinement or education, that kind of thing. No, I don't think it would have been a major factor. It certainly was a major factor, though, that Galilee was looked down upon by the cultural center, by the religious center, which we know is Jerusalem. And I was picking up on the story of Peter. You know, that's how they tripped him up. Remember? The girl says, you were with them. Well, your very accent gives you away. So when you were down in the capital city, they noticed you. I don't know what a parallel would be exactly. If somebody with a strong southern drawl was in New York City or something, I don't know. I don't know a good parallel, but is that right? Bishop Strait, our bishop here at one time? Yeah. Is that right? But no one looked down on him. I think we still tend to think in those terms. Yeah. Yeah, right. I would say that on the basis of biblical scholarship, it's really hard to answer that question. Clearly, it says it in the Bible, talks about his brothers and sisters, even names them at times. In fact, it names them in that Mark 6, the section that I was using there in my presentation. It's a lot of debate. Some people say the word, the Greek word used there can mean relatives in general, so it could be cousins and not blood brothers and sisters. On the other hand, some other scholars claim that that's the obvious meaning, that he had brothers and sisters. I would say in the biblical evidence alone, it probably isn't really possible to solve that. Surely, having children is really important. Having children in Judaism is a major thing. In fact, it shows, in fact, for example, if a woman didn't have any children and her husband died, it was the job of the deceased husband's brother to try to raise up children with her. Having children was a big, big thing, yes. Very important in their culture. Yes. The apocryphal Gospels, that would be things like the Gospel of Thomas and Gospel of James and so on. There are other Gospels besides the four we've got. I would say not much credence. They reading of them, I mean, they're very fanciful. They sound very different from our Gospels. It's there where we get those stories of Jesus as a little boy making birds out of clay and having them fly away and things like that. Everything we would know about what I said here, the ordinariness of Jesus, most of Jesus' life, I think we can count on. In other words, if you were in Nazareth while he's growing up for 30 years, you wouldn't have a clue. I mean, I think what we're getting here, what I'm suggesting is these people would say, well, geez, he's so ordinary. He's a carpenter. Oh, he learned the trade at Joseph. He worked. Nice kid, yeah, but a Messiah? No. I mean, I think that would be the thing. That's their problem. What does it say in the Gospels? Jesus could not work any miracles there, or very few, it says. He could work a few, but very few in Nazareth, because they wouldn't believe in him, because he was so ordinary, because he's pretending to be more than he is. We've been observing that kid for 30 years. Who does he think he is? He's got, nothing special about him. He wasn't a rabbi. Got to remember that. Not a rabbi. Wasn't a learned man. Didn't write any books or anything. He was without portfolio. He didn't have credentials. He was this itinerant rabbi.
Does each writer of the gospel have access from the earlier gospels, we know, so that stories, the fact that they're related, the fact that maybe I read it and I improve on them with my version of the not?
Yeah, surely the first of the Gospels is Mark, written around 70, and then when Luke and Matthew wrote their Gospels, they had Mark in front of them, and they wrote in the 80s. Remember, we're not dealing with eyewitnesses, and so we're dealing with a situation here where they are using material that's been passed on in the community, much of it oral, but some of it written. In fact, we think they had another written source also, Matthew and Luke did. So this is what accounts for the similarities. You read these stories, here is what we call a gospel harmony. That is, the four Gospels are set side by side. Well, people can't see that, but they're in columns down here. And you can read exactly how they're the same and how they're different, and how they add things or subtract. So it's very revealing to look at a gospel harmony like this. For example, when Luke writes about that story where Mark says that Jesus' mother went out to get him, or is at the house, and Jesus doesn't even acknowledge them. When they come to the house and they say, your mother and brothers and sisters are out here looking for you, and he says, well, who are my mother and brother and sisters? Oh, those who have faith, those are the people. Doesn't even acknowledge them. But when the implication is that Mary was with the group who came to bring him back home in Mark's Gospel. In Luke, he changes that. He doesn't want to put Mary in a bad light here. He wants to make sure she looks good all throughout his Gospel. And so he sort of leaves her out of the scene. But, we often say that Matthew's Gospel is sort of an abridged, edited version of Mark, where he makes certain additions and certain changes and so on. Yeah, we'll only do this a little bit longer, yeah? Yeah. Very difficult thing. I think there's no doubt that Jesus talked a lot about the end of the world, and that he gave the impression that there was not much time to fool around, that you had to act now and decisively. He clearly said, and I think we can take this too as being factual, that he did not know when the end would come. He says that clearly in Mark's Gospel. When he was asked, when's the end time coming, he says, I don't know. Neither the Son of Man knows that, nor the angels know that. Only the Father knows that. Now let me give you an example of the way I told you that people today think that they know a lot more about Jesus of Nazareth? Well, one of the criteria is that if there's negative stuff in the Gospels that sort of make like Peter look bad or Jesus look bad, that we can't imagine them making that kind of thing up in 70 and 80 to make them look bad. So if they're writing in 70, 80, the end of the world didn't come yet, and they put in there statements like by Jesus like, well, this generation will not pass away till all this is accomplished, then we feel as though he really said that kind of thing. That's one of the criteria they use to try to figure this out, along with others. Other kind of criteria is if there's all the various traditions hold the same thing on the question, or whether there is any parallels to it in other literature at the time, and so on. Or whether it fits into the whole business that he ended up getting executed or not. Does it help us explain that? So the scholars got a lot of criteria they use to try to make this determination whether we're dealing with something that is indeed accurate or not. I would say that with this business of the imminence of the end, of not fooling around, of that, hey, we can't waste time, I think Jesus was part of his culture. The culture at the time had what we call an apocalyptic sense. That is, a sense that the end times were coming, that, boy, something tragic's going to happen, or God's going to come down and do something terrific here and straighten out all this evil. It's bad times we're on. God's going to do something. That was in the air. So many people at the time felt that way. And Jesus' language and categories, I think, reflected that kind of general viewpoint. But I think what we carry away from what Jesus said, and that is so important, is that decisions have to be made, that you can't drift in life, that the kingdom of God is here now and one has to make decisions about it. And I think that's the sort of enduring strength of what Jesus had to say there about this end time. You would probably get different kinds of answers on that from various scholars. It swings back and forth. What I said there I would consider to be sort of a middle-of-the-road position. I would think it is the kind of position that says that Jesus was a man of his time, that he didn't hesitate to use the categories and language and imagery that were current at his time so he could reach the people, that his real intent was to say the kingdom of God is here now, and he was right about that, that his clear message was you can't just drift in life, you have to decide, and that's an enduring part of what we have to hold or try to live through. I'm going to go on now. Okay, let me take up a second thing. And now we have thing here. This is John the Baptist now. This is John the Baptist telling us about this whole thing that he's involved in. This is John the Baptist. He's now in prison in Machaerus in Perea. So we are interviewing him in prison or something like that, I think, is the premise. Well, I want to tell you the whole story, right from the beginning. And my own ministry began there with a sort of a feeling like I was called by God. Called by God to preach a message of repentance to the people. It seemed like we were just not doing well. I heard about that group of the Essenes down there in the Dead Sea area. And those people knew what they were about. They were serious about religion. They were fasting and disciplined in their life. And I liked that kind of thing. And I felt called by God to go out and preach. So I went out in the desert. Used to eat grasshoppers and so on. Wore rough clothes. And I started preaching. And I preached repentance. Change your way of life. Well, I'm out there preaching, and as harsh a message as that is, more and more people came started coming to hear it. It was amazing. You'd think people wouldn't have time for that, but crowds started coming out. They came up from Jerusalem. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees even. Imagine the Sadducees, those guys, aristocrats, priestly people, near the temple, near the center of power. They're out there listening to my sermon. Well, I tell you, we needed a symbol for all that. So we started baptizing them. The Essenes baptized people, you probably know that. Well, I figured we'd do the same thing. So we immersed them in water. Told them, this is a sign, repent. Used to tell them, don't defraud people. If you're in the military, treat people right. Well, so going on like this, and special about that guy, you could just tell. And he comes up, and as he gets closer, I recognize him. Our mothers were friends. Our mothers, yeah. My mom used to tell me a story of how his mother came over and helped her when she was pregnant for a while. Well, anyway, he comes there, and he wants to be baptized. This great man, I could see it in him, felt it. Hey, holiness in him. He says he wants to be baptized by me. I felt about that big. I said, no way. I'm not doing any baptizing of you. We ought to reverse the roles here. But he insisted. That was funny. He insisted, and he had that voice and that power. And when he said, no, I want you to baptize me, I said, right. That's what we're going to do. He was like that, He was just powerful. So down he goes into the water for the baptism. He no more than comes out of the water. It was like thunder. Thunder up in the sky. And I'd swear there was a voice that said, this is my beloved Son. This is my beloved Son. And then it was like the Spirit came down on him. The Spirit like in the form of a dove. When I saw that dove, what I thought about? You probably thought of the same thing. I thought of the time when Yahweh created the world, when the Spirit hovered over the water. And you know what else I thought about? Noah. After the flood, sends the dove out. Remember that? Sends the dove out, comes back with the olive branch. Knew the flood was over. That's what I thought about when I saw that. Something special is going on here. Yahweh is at work in a special way. There's just no doubt. This is my Son, whom I'm well pleased. The Spirit is down upon. I think something special happened to him right then too. It was like his face was transformed. It's like something was going on inside of him. It's like when that voice spoke to him, he knew who was talking to him. It was like he was in union with that voice, like he was one with it. You know what my theory is? That it's right then that he started thinking about calling that voice, calling the one who had spoken to him, his Father. I think it's then that he started getting that idea of talking in such a familiar way about God. I remember the first time that came back to me. I remember that some of my disciples were out listening to him preach, and he got up and he started talking about God, and he called them, get this, I hate to even repeat it, he called them Abba. Well, you can imagine, calling the great God Papa, Daddy. In my whole life, I've never used God's name once. His official name, I've never used it. I won't use it now while I'm talking to you. No good Jew will do that. We won't even say his name. And here, Jesus is walking around calling them Abba. My theory is that all started right when he was baptized. That's what I think happened. I think right then he felt so close to God that he felt so at one with him, that he felt God was with him so much, that he took so seriously that phrase, "You're my beloved Son," that right then he started thinking in those very familiar terms. And that's where he got that idea, Abba. No one has ever said Abba before. No one ever even thought of calling God that before. And here he is preaching that way. Boy, it tells you something about who God really is to us. You know, I'm getting a different slant on God. You know, somehow God doesn't seem like he's so judgmental to me, so harsh. No, that was my big bit. God's tough. He's the king. No, do your penance. Boy, when Jesus preaches, it sounds different. He's talking about Abba and love and so on. Well, you know, one thing I think about Jesus, so I'm not so sure he was so smart, really, at some points. He used to, I think he was, well, I put it to you this way. It hurts me when I hear people call him a glutton and a drunkard. You never heard anyone call me that, did you? Glutton and a drunkard. Not me. I'm eating locusts and grasshoppers, man, you know. But Jesus, that hurts me. You know, I wonder why he's doing that. Why is he he's out there maybe a little too much? I don't know why he had to make 150 gallons of wine at Cana. You know? 150 gallons, a few bottles would have done it. You know? Well, you know, Herod finally got me. Herod Antipas. I knew it was going to happen. As soon as I challenged him about his marriage. Imagine a guy marries his brother's wife, Herodias. She hates my guts, I want to tell you. I figure I'm here in prison for a while, but one of these days she's going to figure out a way to get rid of me. You can count on it. I don't know how she'll do it, but she is a devious woman. And she will get me sooner or later. No doubt. You know, but while you're in prison, doubts occur. You know, it seems so clear to me, but when you're isolated like this, you begin to wonder. I started thinking, you know, is he really what I think he is? Is Jesus really a Messiah? So I was beside myself. I finally got some friends that got in here to talk to me. I says, go ask him. I want to know what's going on. Go directly to him and say, are you the one or not? And you know, when they came back and they said, this was terrific. They came back and they said, well, what did he say? What did he say when you asked him? And he says to them, well, you go back and tell John this, that the blind are seeing, and the lame are walking, and the poor have the good news preached to them. I'll tell you, my heart soared. I knew right then he is the one. Imagine that, preaching the good news to the poor. Yeah, he's the one. Gave me great strength here in prison. I feel good about all this now. I only got one worry. You know, all those followers of mine, they're still loyal to me. You know, some of them won't go over to Jesus. I keep telling them, not me. It's not me, it's Jesus. Follow him. And convince some of those people. I got the most stubborn followers in the world. Well, I got the feeling that after Herodias figures out how to get rid of me here, those followers of mine are still going to be fighting this thing. Can't tell exactly where that's going to go. But I certainly hope that those people shape up. And if you get a chance to talk to them, tell them, not me, Jesus. He's the one you're supposed to follow. Well, there we have the story of John the Baptist, maybe from somewhat from his viewpoint. And again, the story is meant to tell us things about Jesus that I think we know to be historically true. Clearly, the baptism of Jesus is crucial. Part of the public ministry of Jesus in a way, an event that's attested in the Gospels, surely something that happened. Also, his relationship with John. Seems that Jesus sort of bounced off of John. John was very important to him. It's like when they got John, and put him in prison, that then it was time for Jesus to take over. In other words, one of the reasons maybe Jesus decided to go there and get baptized was that the mission made sense to him. With John, he thought John was on the right track. He wanted to be part of that. And when John gets into prison, Jesus sort of takes over leadership of this movement that John had begun. And we know that Jesus was taken with this when John's death. Herodias did get rid of John. You remember that story, and so on. Found out how to get his head on a platter. Got her revenge. And I think that John's death again influenced Jesus. Sort of colored the way his disciples thought. I think there was a fear that came over his disciples and so on, thinking how easily that could happen to Jesus. Herod Antipas could get upset with him just as well and try to throw him in prison and to kill him also. So I think that whole relationship with John is historically part of the record here that Jesus is dealing with. Then there is the whole use of Abba and what some like to call the Abba experience. In other words, it seems clear that Jesus was a mystic. That's how I was trying to portray that Jesus was one who was in close union with his Father. That Jesus knew that relationship and knew the loving side of it as no other person ever has in the history of the world. And that clearly that is what he went about doing, talking about God as Abba. Remember I said the most agnostic theologians, the ones who say we know almost nothing about Jesus, still will admit that Jesus did go around calling God Abba. And the reason for that is there aren't any precedents for it. There's no precedence in Hebrew literature, in any groups of the time. It's a totally new kind of idea that can arise only with this great person that we know as Jesus of Nazareth. And so that becomes crucial to understanding him. That seems to be the religious experience he worked out of. And he began to talk to God in those familiar terms, taught us to deal with God in the same way. He balanced that with another image that I think is important to realize here, and that is of God as king. Because his major other metaphor he kept using was that the reign of God is at hand, the kingdom of God is at hand. So the other image, put side by side with Abba, is king. Abba, king. It's interesting how that creates a marvelous image of God as one who is close and familiar and alluring and with us and to be trusted and forgiving. On the other hand, God is transcendent, over above, the judge, the king, holy, holy. I'm a person of unclean lips. I can't talk about that God. You look at that God's face and you will surely die. Kingship. So Jesus, it appears, in his own preaching about God, I think we can take this as clear part of historical record here, saw God in those two ways, Abba and King. And it gives us this marvelously balanced idea of an immanent, familiar, close God, as well as a transcendent God that is in rule over the world. Also, John's fear in prison definitely turned out to be the case. That is, throughout the whole of the first century, it appears that followers of John kept their allegiance to him and wouldn't go with Jesus of Nazareth. You've got a lot of things in John's Gospel, which I told you is written around the year 95, 96, something like that. You've got that worry about. There's always the thing of making sure that John is kept in check. I'm not worthy to loose the sandals of his feet. Oh, John, I'm nothing compared to him. The Gospels keep emphasizing that, having to play that down. We have some evidence, in other words, that followers of John continued throughout the first century and would sort of thought that their man was the one that they ought to stick with. So, What does our little vignette here with John tell us? It tells us about the baptism of Jesus, his deepest kind of religious experience, some of his language about God that he used throughout his public career, and also some of the battles that went on with the followers after that. I'm going to suggest at this point that we do our one-to-one discussion for a minute. I invite you to turn to the person next to you and just for a couple minutes maybe go back over the story that I tried to portray with John and see what meaning that has to you. See what you learn about Jesus through the eyes of John and as reflecting the Scriptures. Let's do that for a couple minutes. You're right. That's right. Yeah. My name is Zacchaeus. And I want to tell you my story. As you probably know, I am the chief, mind you, tax collector in all of Jericho. Now that is a big job. In fact, I am about the wealthiest man in all of Jericho as well. But that really, there's trade-offs to this, I want to tell you. Because people don't like me. As you know, we tax collectors got a lousy reputation. Well, I can see it. Some of our group are not too good. Let's face it, we're working for the Romans. Nobody likes that to begin with. My theory is somebody's got to collect the taxes. We didn't do it. The Romans would find somebody else to do it. But the people don't see it that way. You know, people look upon us as nothing more than thieves. That's a terrible life to live here. And as I say, I got to admit that a lot of people don't do it. Of course, I'm a Jew. Some people say I'm not too observant with the law. I don't do too well with it. Well, I suppose they got a point with that. I am a little lax at times. One day, word got to me that this traveling preacher was coming through. Jesus was his name. I thought, well, I think I'll go check him out. I think I'll see how this, what's happening here. So I headed down to the main street there, in Jericho. Well, I'm telling you, there was a crowd. It was a gigantic crowd. I mean, you couldn't even see. I couldn't see anything. Of course, I am a little short, you know. I'm not defensive about it, mind you. I'm 5'3", but well, I couldn't see. That was the problem. I couldn't see over the crowd, see Jesus. So I figured I might as well go back home, and I started heading back, and just then I saw this tree there along the road where he was going to be coming, sycamore tree. So I climbed up in that. Felt a little funny, the wealthiest man in town sitting in this tree, you know. Nobody likes me anyway. See me up in this tree. It just gives them something else to talk about, I suppose. So I'm up in this tree, and I could see he's walking down. He gets right up near me, and you won't believe it, but he looks up at me in the tree, and he says, "I'm coming to your house tonight to stay." What? Coming to my house? People in this town won't even speak to me. I haven't had dinner with anybody in this town since I can't remember when. He won't come near my house. And this guy passing through says, "Well, I'll be staying at your house tonight." Almost more than I could take. Well, you should have seen the reaction of the people, the crowds. I said, "What? This guy's a sinner. Don't you know? This guy's a tax collector." Oh, well, I had to defend myself. I'll admit I'm not too observant about the law. But you know something? I give half of my possessions to the poor. No kidding. Half of my possessions goes to the poor. Wealthy, yeah, but look at all the people I'm helping. And if I ever defraud somebody just a little bit, you know what I give them? Fourfold. They give back 4 times what they were defrauded out of. I do. I'm not kidding about that. That's my general business practice in this town. Frankly, I think that's why it goes so well. Yeah, fourfold. Well, here I am in this battle with the crowd, and I figure at this point Jesus is going to back down. He probably didn't know who I was when he said he's going to stay at my house. I figured that after he heard who I was, tax collector, chief tax collector, part of the hated out group, I figured he's going to back down and say, sorry, I think I'll stay someplace else tonight. But he didn't do that. Stuck with me. Can you imagine that? Stuck with me. In fact, came right over to my house at night. You know what he said? Salvation has come to this house. Salvation has come to my house. Chief tax collector. Outcast of all the people. Then he said something, I didn't really know exactly what he meant. He said something like, he was about the business of searching out the lost. Well, I want to tell you, I might be 5'3", but when he came to my house, I felt like I was about 6'5". I felt like a big man. I felt like I was all right. I felt like I amounted to something, like I was worthwhile. Can you imagine that? Jesus, the preacher, the miracle worker, came and stayed at my house. And it's made all the difference. He spoke the truth when he said, salvation, healing has come to your house. Well, we have in the story of Zacchaeus another clear historical fact about Jesus. And that is that he did associate with the outcast, the alienated, the down and out, the hated, marginalized people in his own society. It was one of the charges brought against him, that he hung around with those people. There's no doubt that he seemed to have a special love for them, that he singled them out in some ways, that he tried to, in various ways, to make them feel important. It's also clear that this kind of behavior angered many people in the society. It made them hate Jesus in a way, that he would associate with prostitutes and with tax collectors and these terrible people. Bugged them no end. The response in the story of, doesn't he know who those people are? That response is found, doesn't he know who that woman is who's anointing his feet? Doesn't he know she's a sinner? That became the common refrain. Created a lot of problems for Jesus in his ministry among the respectable people, the in-group. Didn't like this at all. He had with what the outcasts we call table fellowship. It seems like eating together was very important for Jesus. Well, it doesn't say it. We imagine that when he stayed at Zacchaeus' house that he ate there with them. A lot of different occasions we have that idea of him eating with these people. The eating seemed to be a part of the tradition. Eating was a way of saying, hey, we form a fellowship here. We are a community. We share something at a deeper level. The eating together became symbolic for Jesus throughout the Scriptures of this deeper union that we have with people. It seems clear that Jesus was one who tried to break down the barriers between people. If you want to think of what he was about when he was running around, it seems to me we could say two things. One, he was trying to heal people, like Zacchaeus and so on. Heal people of their psychic wounds as well as their physical wounds, trying to help people to be whole and integrated. And the other thing it seems like he was trying to do throughout his ministry was to break down the barriers between people. He did that in so many different ways. You get the clear story where he talks to a woman in public, something that was not allowed. It seems like he tried in various ways to break down the barriers between the males and the females in his culture, to try to bring the women more into the mainstream, try to break down the barriers between the Jews and the Samaritans and the Galileans. While he was a Galilean, as some authors written, he was not a regional Galilean. In other words, he didn't think in small terms. He wasn't like, I'm from Galilee, forget those people in Judea. He wasn't like that. He was one that broke barriers and brought people together. So his action here with Zacchaeus fits in with the whole pattern of his life. I'm not saying it as sharply as I would like to say it, that you see, there were social taboos. That was a stratified culture. I'm not sure that we can quite feel it the same way. If we would think of Jim Crow laws in the South at one time. Jesus would stay in a black motel or eat in a black restaurant, or maybe you get a little feel in that way for the way he cut through the social taboos of his time, trying to show this fundamental equality among people, that God, Yahweh, Abba, his Father, really loved all of the human beings. So, this latest fact that we're bringing out about Jesus is his table fellowship with the outcast, his special care for the marginalized, the alienated in his own society. Zacchaeus is representative of a whole style of life that Jesus adopted. Okay, I think it would be a good idea if we would take a short break here. And let me see, I've got two more of these stories here to go in trying to do all this. So let's take a 5-minute break here and we'll reassemble. Remember, what we're about is trying to uncover the historical Jesus, and I'm using the gospel stories to push us in that direction and to see some general points. When I'm telling the stories, there's little additions in there, that's not part of the historical record here. When I do my analysis afterwards, I try to say then what we really get out of it. And what we've gotten out of it so far here is that Jesus is a Galilean whose hometown is Nazareth, and one who was baptized by John in the Jordan and began preaching and talked about God as Abba, King, and one who did have this close relationship with the outcast in his own society. So far that's what we have. Well, we got other facts. His mother is Mary and Joseph, and his father's Joseph, and all of that kind of thing. Okay, now I will adopt a new character. Well, all these things didn't happen all that long ago, so they're pretty fresh in my mind. So they're fairly easy to recall. Because I've had to repeat this story, I don't know how many times. I'm getting tired of it, to tell you the truth. Well, yeah, I'm from Jerusalem, and what they say is true. I was born blind. That's true. And I used to, it was a difficult life for me. We had to beg. I used to sit in one of the populous places and beg and try to just make enough to keep myself going. Parents were alive. They didn't have a lot of money to help me. Tried to fend for myself. Being blind in this culture is not easy. Well, one Sabbath day, I'm sitting there, I hear a crowd coming up. I figure this is a good chance, collect a little from these people. Kind of, always I'm on the alert for how big the crowds are. So, when they're getting close, I could hear them talking. And one of them, he must have been looking at me. You always feel funny. You feel like people are looking at you. You don't know. But they started talking. One guy said, I heard him clear. Carol, I don't know why people talk like this. He said, well, why is he blind? Did he sin, or did his parents sin? Well, that bugged me no end, when they're bringing up that kind of stuff. But the reason it bothered me is because it really touched some deep anger inside of myself. Rage over this blindness. And to tell you the honest truth, I thought that same way all the time. And all my life I blamed my parents. It had to have been my parents' fault. What did I ever do? It had to have been their sin that made me blind like this. All this is flashing through my mind. Suddenly I hear a strong, authoritative voice. Strong voice. And what does the voice say? It says, wrong. Neither one. Neither one. Neither one. It wasn't the sin. It wasn't my sin. It wasn't my parents' sin. This voice, that was so attractive, it says, well, this is really so that God's work can be shown forth. It has something to do with God's work. Well, I stopped to think. I never heard anything like it. I was stunned. Kept thinking about it, and then they got closer, and the one guy, I think it was the guy who said neither one, he comes over, and the way I get the story later on, he spit on the ground, made some mud, and then I felt his touch for the first time. Sort of a gentle touch. Put his hand on my head, and he took the mud and he rubbed it all over my eyes. What's going on here, I thought to myself. And then he talked to me. He said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Pool of Siloam? How am I going to get over there? Well, what's this? I go, this guy's crazy. Why should I go wash there? I can wash closer by here. Why do I got to walk way over there? But again, it was something about the way he said. He said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Well, I'm going to tell you, I made the best decision I ever made in my life. I got myself up, got a friend over there, and said, let's go over to Siloam. I don't know what it's all about. So I went over there, told me to wash, so I bent down in the pool. My friend helped me, and I put the water on my eyes, started wiping off that mud. I don't know why I put mud on my eyes. I started wiping it off. You won't believe this, but just like that, I could see. It was amazing. It was just amazing. Just right away I could see. My eyes were open. Oh, it was exciting. I'm looking around all the stuff I'd never seen. Started walking around. It was great. You could walk wherever you wanted. And so my friend spotted me. He said, look. And he said, geez, that guy looks just like our friend. Looks just like him. Isn't that funny? So they came over to talk to me, and they asked me who I was, and I said, I'm your friend. I'm the one. I'm the beggar. I'm your friend. That's me. Now I can see it. They asked me, says, well, how can you see now? Oh? Who did this for you? And I told them, well, it was Jesus who did it. Jesus put mud on my eyes and said, go wash the pool of Siloam, and I can see. And they said, oh, we want to see this guy. Where is he? He says, God, me, I don't know. I don't know where he is. Well, next day, I get a summons from the Pharisees. They call me in. They want to talk to me. So their reaction was really strange. They said, are you the guy that was born blind and you're cured? I said, yeah, it's me. And they said, Well, he shouldn't have done that to you on the Sabbath. He shouldn't have been curing people on the Sabbath. I thought, that's crazy. Here I've been all this time waiting to see, and I can see. Who cares what day it happened on? But they were upset. You'd be surprised the way it was. They shouldn't be doing this on the Sabbath. And then they started talking about it. They said, well, that guy's a sinner. If Jesus is a sinner, he can't be doing this kind of thing. And so they asked me what I thought about it. I felt good. I feel proud of this just to be able to tell you. I stood up for them. I knew that they were upset with him, knew they thought he was a sinner. I felt proud. I said to them right straight out, these Pharisees, I said, he is a prophet. Well, then they called in my parents. I don't know why they felt they had to involve them. Called in the parents. And I'll tell you, my parents were scared to death. Because these guys had power to kick people out of the synagogue, you know. And anybody who was believing in Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah, that's exactly what they were doing. Out of the synagogue. So my parents were scared. So they called him in. They said, I hear your son, you know, was born blind. Is that true? Was he born blind? And they said, yeah. And they said, and he can see now, is that true? And they said, that's right. And they said, well, how can this be? Well, they wanted to get out of it, you know. I don't blame them. They were scared to death. They said, don't ask us. Ask him. He's old enough. They don't know. Ask him. Don't bother us with it. So they got out of there. So, of course, I get called back in again. Terrible hassle here I have to go through. So this time they try to get me to admit that this Jesus is a sinner. I repeated my story. You stayed with the story. I said, look, yes, I was born blind. Yes, I'm the same guy. Now I can see. Put the mud on the eyes. Go to the pool. Wash. That's it. What can I tell you? That's how it happened. Well, they blew up. I said to them, well, do you want to be his disciples? That was the wrong thing to say. A big mistake. Do we want to be his disciples? They said. You're the one. We're the disciples of Moses. And we don't even know where this guy is from. Probably one of those crazy Galileans or something. We don't even know where he's from down. He's nothing in this capital city of ours. Again, I got to tell you, I'm pretty proud of this. I came right back at him. Right back at him. And I said to them, you can't be a sinner. You can't do things like that unless God is with you. I told them all right. And then they said right there, you're the sinner. Picked me up bodily and threw me right out. Well, went around like this for a while, figured I'm done for with the synagogue, done for with the whole religious grouping here. And then Jesus comes, sought me out. I didn't know where he was. I hadn't seen him since I put the mud on my eyes. He came to me. Imagine that. And he says, no, what's going on? How's things going? Well, I told him. Tough times. And he says to me, strange thing. He says, do you believe in the Son of Man? Well, I don't know, Son of Man. Who's the Son of Man? I was ready to believe in anything he wanted me to. So I says, well, just show me who he is and I'll believe in him. And Jesus says, I'm speaking to you. Son of Man is speaking to you right now. You know what I did? Went right down on my knees and worshipped him. I love to tell the story. Then you know what Jesus said to me? Said something, I didn't know if I really understood it exactly. There was a little group of Pharisees standing around then, came and joined the group as we were going along here, and Jesus said, I came to make the sightless see and the seeing blind. Well, they got the point. Right there, they were really upset. They heard him and they said, "You're not calling us blind, are you? We're not those people who can see but are really blind, are we? Talking about us?" And Jesus said a lot to him, and finally ended up, he said, "You say we see, and you do, and thus your sin remains." Well, I've been telling this story over and over. You know, I said I get sick of telling it, but to tell you the truth, each time I tell it, it becomes a little clearer to me. Each time I tell the story, I understand a little bit more of what Jesus was talking about, the strange business about those who can see can't see, those who are blind be able to see. Somehow he was teaching them a point. Somehow he was making a point by what he did for me. Somehow I'm a symbol. I'm a walking symbol of what Jesus is trying to say. A strange message he's got that nothing is like it really looks like. Something deeper is going on here. Yeah, I'm a symbol of all of that, and I think I'll spend the rest of my days just thinking about the meaning of this fact that I was born blind and now I can see because Jesus, who is a prophet, who is the Son of God and the Son of Man, touched my eyes and cured me. Well, brings us to the next clear point about Jesus. And that is that he was indeed a miracle worker. There's really no doubt about that again. One of the ways we know there is no doubt about it is that even his enemies admitted this. Even those who were opposed to Jesus had to come around to saying, well, yeah, the guy's born blind, now he can see. Jesus has cured him. But they had reactions to that. They admitted he did it, but the controversy became, where did he get the power? And for the opponents it was, he's a sinner. He's getting that power in the evil way. As they said on another occasion, he does all of this by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of devils. That's how he's able to. He works miracles, yeah. You can't deny that. Blind people can see. But he does that by an evil force. Whereas the believers, those who followed Jesus, adopted another position. Their position was, he does it by the power of Yahweh. That the fact that Jesus works miracles is a sign that the kingdom of God is here. That Yahweh's power to bring love and hope and beauty into the world is shown by these miracles. That's in John's Gospel. The miracles of Jesus are called signs. Remember that? The first of his signs he worked at Cana of Galilee. They're signs. What are they signs of? The current power of God in the world, that the reign of God is coming, that the power of good is more powerful than all of the evil that exists. It seems one way of thinking of Jesus' miracles is that they're sort of what I call ad hoc. They seem to be worked as a response to a human need. I mean, he's walking along, and I suppose there's other sick people around too, but he searches this guy out. Somehow there's a special affinity here, and he cures this guy. The miracles are never worked, it seems, to bring attention to himself. That was a temptation. That's what the devil wanted him to do. Go up the top of the temple and jump down and don't get hurt. And do it right with a big crowd around. Then everyone will believe. Jesus refused miracles like that. Refused to turn the stones into bread. Refused to do any miracles for his own advantage. And so the miracles are seen not as the breaking of the laws of nature, not like strange, weird things that happen, but as signs of the presence of God. Reminders that God can heal, give sight to the blind. Miracles, when they're in the Gospels, and well, I'm supposed to be concentrating on the historical Jesus. So there it is. miracle worker, no doubt about it. Most of the miracles he works are cures. They are the sign that he brings healing, as I said before. He cures Peter's mother-in-law, the blind, the lame. These are the kind of people that he works with. Lazarus brings him back to life. Those are the major body of miracles that Jesus did. There's certain other miracles that Jesus did that are like the calming of the storm. Now that's a little different. That has to do with power over nature. And there's other miracles that are recorded in the Gospels that I think Jesus probably didn't do. And if there's any one that I figure he didn't do for a lot of reasons it's the one where he takes the devils out of the people and sends them into the herd of swine and they run over the cliff. This really does not sound like Jesus to me. No, it doesn't sound like something that he was really about. There's a lot of reasons why the scholars would not think that that's an authentic miracle of Jesus. Without going into the read, there's a lot of stories in other cultures that sound the same and so on. It doesn't fit that we've got this whole herd of swine there. It doesn't fit that Jesus would ruin the economy. I think I will do the last section here, and then we'll have time for questions, and I hope. Well, this seems like a fitting way to end this being Holy Week, and as we move towards Good Friday. This is now the Passion story told from the viewpoint of Pontius Pilate. Well, I have a career in the Roman government. It was about the year 26 when I was appointed as the procurator of all of Judea, appointed by the emperor himself. I might a lot of responsibility in this. I got troops at my command. I got the power to collect taxes in this area, and I got the right of capital punishment. So this is really a big kind of position that I have. I live up in Caesarea. I don't like to be in Jerusalem. It's so crowded and I can't understand those people. They're always milling around and everything. I like to stay up in Caesarea. I come down just on the big feasts and sort of make sure that order is kept there. I'm under the control of the guy in Syria. I suppose you know that. The legate of the emperor in Syria. He's my immediate boss. People say that I'm arbitrary and cruel and crude and violent kind of person. Well, I'm not afraid. And if you're a procurator, you got to be like that, In fact, when I first got this job, I figured I'm going to make a point right away. My predecessor, he would never bring in the standard bearers for the legions with the the one with the picture of Caesar on it. He said, well, the Jews don't like that kind of thing. He says that, he was wishy-washy, if you ask me. So, as soon as I got here, I brought him in. Brought the standard, I brought him right into the temple. I'll show these guys who's boss. Got to be strong, especially at the beginning, Well, I headed up to Caesarea then when I first got in. The next thing you know, there's this big delegation of Jews up there telling me that they want me to get that standard with Caesar's picture on it out of their temple. Well, I put them off for a few days, and then I told them all to go out to the big stadium, outside there. Got them all in there. They thought I was going to give them a talking to. You know what I did? Well, you probably heard about it. Josephus wrote it down. That historian, Josephus, he wrote it down. Well, I got the troops out and I mowed them down right in the stadium. There's how you start, They knew who was boss from the first moment I ever got here. Well, I did take temple money too, and build an aqueduct, but we needed an aqueduct, you know. And I got the right to take their money anyway, so did that as well. Well, then there was this case of Jesus. Well, it was the feast, you know, it was the Passover, so I came down, usually do keep order in the city. And the best that I can reconstruct this thing, I was never sure I really knew all that was going on with the case, to tell you the truth. But the best I can reconstruct it was he was from Galilee, some little town I never heard of. And he evidently got these Jewish leaders mad, upset. It seems like he came down into the city with some of his followers. I don't think he had that many. You know, I think it's a small group. I don't think it amounted to much, to tell you the truth. But he comes down into the city, and he gets in here, and he goes in the temple. And I don't know, he was upset about something. I never figured that out, but he starts throwing out the money changers. Well, this got the guys in charge of the temple upset. And I had the feeling that they really were out to get him from then on. He had a spy. He had a little group of people, I don't know, 10 people or so that used to follow him all the time. And one of them was a spy for the temple people, the religious leaders. And so one night, he was out, I think it was in the Mount of Olives, and they go out there, and they ask me for help with this thing. Of course, they got a temple police, you know, the Jews got their own little police force, and they wanted my help. Well, so I said, well, okay, you're going to have a few soldiers. You know, you want to go out and arrest this guy, grab him. So a few of our soldiers, Roman soldiers, and a few of their temple police went out there, and they spotted him. Sure enough, the spy in the group led him right to him, knew right where he'd be working. Got him there and identified him, and they brought him in. And it seems my men split at that point, and they had a little hearing for him, you know, and they were trying, it seemed like, to figure out what he had done wrong. It seems like they thought he was against their religion, or they said he was blaspheming or making himself into a false prophet. Well, they had this meeting, and they really couldn't get any place with it. It seemed like some of them wanted to kill him. Some people said no. And they didn't know, they couldn't get any kind of a unanimous vote. I don't know how they do all that stuff. I guess they vote or something that they can kill somebody. So that's when I got into it. Well, you know, something's been bugging me about this case from the first moment. I mowed down people in the stadium like I didn't care. But this guy somehow was different. And I didn't want any part of this case, and to tell you the truth, I tried to stay out of it from the beginning. As soon as they came, they said, you got your own law, you judge him. You don't like what he's doing, you take care of him. Well, they said, well, we can't put him to death. Well, I don't know about that. I think they could have handled that whole matter, but they put it back on me. So I figured I better talk to him. So I brought him in. Oh, I'm the boss around here. You expect a little respect and so on. I thought he'd be terrified. I stood there like he was in charge. It was weird. Oh, this guy, he didn't know. I could rub him out like that. I'd bring the soldier and whoop, he's done. But he didn't seem to care. Well, I said, well, who are you? These people are saying, you know, you're some sort of a king. Are you the king of the Jews? Well, he admitted it. Admitted it right there. Right, yeah, he says, you know, that's what you say. Didn't talk much, though. Wasn't ready to defend himself. I said, don't you know what I could do to you? And he wasn't about to defend himself. So I'm still thinking, how am I going to get out of this? I don't know why, but I didn't want to kill this guy. Didn't want to execute him. Well, my wife, she had this crazy dream. She got me in the middle of the day. Sends a messenger over to tell me about her dream. I said, you got to be kidding me. Passover, I'm trying to keep the city in order. I had this silly case in front of me. You want to tell me about dreams? You know what? The dream, get this, the dream was about this Jesus. She didn't even know him. She dreamed about this Jesus and said something about don't mess with him. That made me feel more eerie than ever about the whole thing. Well, I'm trying to get rid of that. So I sent him over to Herod Antipas. I know he didn't like any of these kind of people. He didn't have any trouble knowing what to do with John the Baptist, if you remember. So we're going to get rid of this guy. So I sent him over there, and the word I got back, I never liked Herod Antipas, to tell you the truth, but I was just trying to figure out a way to get him on the spot, not myself. Never can trust those Jewish leaders. You know, we ought to have our own people out there. Never did like that system anyway. But Jesus gets over there. Herod was really itching to see him, you know, wanted to talk to him. And what happens? Gets there, and this Jesus says not one word. He stands there. There's the word I got, noble, quiet, calm. Doesn't say word one to Herod. It infuriates him. Surprised he didn't kill him on the spot. So he sends him back to me. Now I'm starting to get desperate. I don't know what to do all this. So I figure, well, maybe if I beat him up a little bit, and if people see a little bit of blood, that'll satisfy him. So I tell him to scourge him. Bloody him up a little. Beat him up. Oh, it's good for the soldiers anyway. They like to fool around like that. Bring them out figuring, well, when they see him like this, they say, that's enough. You know, let him go. Forget it. Because you know what I figured out? I know why they handed him over to me. I know why they gave him to me. It was out of jealousy. These guys are jealous. These guys are upset about what he did in the temple the other night. That's what it's all about. They're upset because they think he's undercutting their authority. They're going to lose their position. These guys are jealous. I understood that. Well, I tried the scourging bit and it doesn't work. They want blood, more blood. So then I tried another ploy. You know, we have the Passover amnesty bit. That's not a bad custom. It's a good way to keep them under control. We ought to release a prisoner to them, somebody they want. Well, we had that guy who really was leading an insurrection. Remember that guy Barabbas? He was a dangerous person. I wasn't really interested in letting him go, but I felt on the spot, and so I said, I got it. You know, I'll give them a choice. They can either choose Jesus or Barabbas. They're bound to choose Jesus. Barabbas, a crummy, lousy character, and that'll get me off the spot. So I give them this choice. Can't believe it. They choose Barabbas to release him, a nothing guy. So here I am, still stuck with Jesus. Well, I knew he was innocent. I knew it hand him over out of jealousy. But they put the pressure on me at that point. I've been having trouble with the officials in Rome. You probably know that in 36, after I went up there to Mount Gerizim and wiped out a few of those people in that religious procession, they called me back to Rome. Took my job away from me. You probably know the rest of that story. But I was on shaky ground and I knew it. And they said, we're going to report you to Rome. That this guy is trying to undercut Caesar's authority and you won't do anything about it. Well, I knew right there they had it. So, called for a bucket of water, washed my hands, felt crummy while I did this. I washed my hands, the blood of this innocent man. I gave the order, I said, execute him. He did it. Carried the cross beam out there, and I don't know why I did this, but I said, put up on the top of the thing, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. I haven't the foggiest notion why I did it. They came and said, well, don't put that. Put, he claimed to be the King of the Jews. No, he's not the King of the Jews. I just said, that's it, gentlemen. I've written that, that's it. Stick with it. So we went out and they executed him. I have had the oddest feeling about this ever since. They said they wanted somebody to guard the tomb, so I said, okay, we'll help them out. And they said the disciples will try to steal that body. You better guard that tomb. We had the tomb guarded. You know what? It was empty. Got me. I don't know whatever happened to him. Never did find out. They had some crazy story about that he was back to life or something. I don't know what happened to him. But to this day, bugs me. The whole thing bothers me. I've wiped out thousands of people, and this one guy stands in my mind and in my conscience. I don't know what to make of it. Well, attempt to reconstruct the story of the death of Jesus through the eyes of Pilate. What it's trying to do is the things that I said in there, many people would think that that's sort of the sequence. That indeed that Jesus was at the Last Supper with he came into Jerusalem, that he did for sure throw these people out of the temple. Exactly when he did it, for sure he did that. Cleansed the temple, historical fact. It helps explain a lot of things about Jesus. One thing is his popularity with people. The other thing is his fact that he was out of favor with the religious establishment. No doubt that the religious establishment didn't like him, made the claim that he was a blasphemer, a false prophet, and so on. The bit about going out, who got him in the garden, that's one theory at least, that it was a combination of Roman soldiers and the temple police, which the Jews did have of their own, Judas the betrayer. They bring him in, and they have an interrogation. In the interrogation, they want to condemn him, but they can't do it. And they decide that the best thing to do is to hand him over to the Romans and try to get them to do it. And that they play on Pilate's weaknesses about worry about his boss, the emperor in Rome, and that he will be in trouble with him. And that he is executed finally as a political revolutionary, as a supposed threat to the established order of the occupying power of the Romans. So, we have there, I think, the essence of the story and the thing that formed the original teaching for the whole of the Christian community. This is the story they told, and it, of course, moved into the area of the resurrection, and I'm going to spend one whole class talking about that other part of the story. So we will stay at this point just with the trial, the death, and the crucifixion of the Lord. Well, we'll save some time. Let's stop there and see if we have questions, comments about this. Yes? Of the dream? I don't know. I think we got great trouble in making that part of the factual history. It's recorded in only one gospel. Hard to tell. I mean, I would see it as part of the embellishment of the story that the evangelists often use to sharpen the point, to make the story more engaging, to show that, I mean, the point of the dream is don't have anything to do with this guy, he's innocent. I think it's part of the evangelist's way of reminding us that Jesus was an innocent person. I think that's the meaning of it. You would certainly expect that, wouldn't you? That's what would cause a certain problem. No one took me up on it in the first part. If you remember the story, the rabbi that I said, the Pharisees, challenged that story. And I would say that there is a lot of feeling and I would say we could say pretty much consensus point among biblical scholars that Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2 do not have the same historical character as the baptism and the miracles and the outcast and the passion and death of the Lord. So what we have in these stories are constructions in order to teach particular lessons, so that each of the evangelists had their own bit in this, their own point that they wanted to make. So if you take Matthew's story of the whole business here, what he clearly wants to do is to undercut the charge of the Galilean not being the Messiah. Bethlehem was the city of David, and it would be nice to have him born there. It appears as though that is what Matthew has done. We really don't know of a census that would fit into that time frame. We wouldn't know of any kind of situation where the Romans would make people go back to their home city like that. It doesn't fit in with what we know of the culture and the time. It's one of the things that leads us to think that we're not dealing with history here, but with material that is designed to teach a lesson about who Jesus is. That is, he is the Son of David. The same thing with what Matthew tells us about Jesus going down to Egypt. Just to give you an example, I quoted Josephus to you. Josephus is the one who tells us all about Pilate. He's the one who tells that story about Pilate. This is extra-biblical source now. And he tells the story of Pilate putting their feet in the stadium and mowing them down. Oh, he was big on pointing out the bad things that these people did. Herod the Great was one of the people that he really took after. He said everything bad he could think of about Herod the Great. But you know one thing that isn't in there? Is the slaughter of the innocent. That's odd. But that makes scholars wonder if the slaughter of the innocent is an historical fact or not. Why would Josephus? Josephus even told us that Herod left orders that when he died, that a number of leading Jewish citizens were to be killed so that there would be tears and mourning when he died. I mean, this is the kind of guy you're dealing with. Herod the Great. These are cruel people. Josephus says nothing about the slaughter of the innocent. The trip down into Egypt. You know, it appears as though there's a clear purpose in what Matthew has done, the trip down into Egypt. That is, he's trying to show us that what Jesus was like Israel before them. The key sentences become God calls his son out of Israel, out of Egypt again. So Jesus recapitulates the journey of Israel, which was to be slaves in Egypt, come back to the promised land. It appears as though through all the stories, Matthew's trying to show that Jesus is the Son of David, to legitimize him as being the Messiah because he was born in Bethlehem and wasn't just from Nazareth or Galilee. We have no other remembrances of Jesus being in Jerusalem or Bethlehem in his early years. We have the 12-year-old story, yes, but before that. All of these things are the reasons why scholars would think we're not dealing here with historical material, but dealing with constructive narrative in order to teach a lesson about Jesus' identity, which we will talk a lot about next class when we talk about Matthew again. And Luke and his story of the wise men, it appears as though that all has to do with the universality of the message of Jesus being open to other people and so on. So, anyway, sort of the longest answer to your question. But it's right. I mean, if these things might not have been quite as strange as we might think, the early story. And we certainly don't have a lot of public record of this. Very different from his death. The public record of his death. Tacitus tells us that Christus was crucified under the procurator Pontius Pilate. We have no corroborating testimony about Jesus' birth in early years. Jim?
When you talk about the Matthew and Luke and the Gospel, about the concept of what's going on in the only four Gospels, there's one
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, the thing is complicated by John's Gospel, which is so different from the Synoptics. And the big debate is, really between those. The Synoptics are pretty much the same. I mean, the same general structure. They multiply. Mark says he cured one blind man. Matthew says two, that kind of thing. Matthew doubles the multiplication story, feeds 5,000, and then very shortly after feeds 4,000. You get that kind of thing. But generally there, the thought is that for the stuff that they're the same, we tend to trust Mark more because he wrote it first and they were using it. And you can see where they changed it. And very often you can see they changed it for their own purposes or added something. Just like Luke in the garden. Luke is compassionate. He wants to show Jesus is compassionate all the time. So he adds something when Jesus is in the garden and Peter takes a sword out and cuts the guy's ear off. Only one evangelist tells us one little fact then, that Jesus cured his ear. Who tells it to us? Obviously, it's Luke. It's a little thing thrown in because he was so interested in always showing the compassion of Jesus. He wouldn't let this guy walk around with no ear. So all kind of things. Luke softens Mark, generally. When Mark is harsh on somebody, Luke will play it down. So there, I think generally among those we tend to think that Mark is more reliable, generally. Although Luke and Matthew had another source of the sayings of Jesus, that's why we find only the Beatitudes in Matthew and Luke and only the Lord's Prayer in Matthew and Luke. And we say that's good historical stuff there, that Jesus did preach like that and so on. But then the debate comes with John, who is so different from the other ones. In the Synoptics, Jesus is very seldom in Jerusalem. Comes down at the end. All his ministries in Galilee. In John, he's popping into Jerusalem all the time. That cure of the blind man blind from birth occurred in Jerusalem. He's often in Jerusalem. Now that, is a big question. How does that sort out? Passover. The Synoptics, I would say Raymond Brown, who I consider to be our finest Catholic scholar and so on, and is a great Johannine scholar, tells us that in a lot of ways, strangely enough, John seems to know the real details properly, better than the Synoptics. A lot of times when he's telling details of the story, the geography and stuff, the Synoptics will be wrong about the Jewish customs, for example, very often. But John seems to be more correct in a lot of those details. So Raymond Brown seems to think that Jesus probably was in Jerusalem more times than the Synoptics say. So he follows John there. Let's take another point where they differ. The Synoptics say that the Last Supper occurred on Passover. John says it was the day before Passover. Now, again, here, generally, the scholars, I think, tend to think that the Synoptics are more reliable there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can say that. I'm not sure I can say that. I'm not sure I picked a good example to sort that out. But what I can say, I think, is make a general statement that it will depend on the given situation and which one seems to have a theological reason for changing it. In fact, I think with the story of the Passover, as I suddenly was thinking more clearly about that, I think is that there's a good reason why the Synoptics would change it to the day of Passover and why it's more unlikely that all this stuff happened on Passover. So probably the details again there, John would be right. In the Synoptic John, but you can see there's a theological reason for changing it because you want the Last Supper to be a Passover meal and to fit in with the whole story of the Eucharist as being the fulfillment of the Passover and so on. So So they will differ on a lot of details, and I think that the scholars it will depend. My own sense of the current scholarship is that people are giving more play to John's Gospel and thinking that in a lot of ways it seems to be more right than they used to think. I think we better stop. We'll talk next week about Matthew's Gospel. We'll tell some more stories about Jesus and various people in the Gospel. If you hand those things in, would you leave these?